Did they mess up? We finally have this expansion's big signature piece of content, as I prefer to call it, with Eureka Orthos, the newest installment in the Deep Dungeon series for Final Fantasy XIV, following up Palace of the Dead and Heaven on High. But there was an expansion gap between Heaven on High and Eureka Orthos, and that was in Shadowbringers. And in Shadowbringers, they iterated on the idea of Eureka from Stormblood, and they developed Bozja as a piece of content that you could do at max level, or 10 levels from max, and you can level up alternate jobs if you so choose to. It was this open world-ish, or at least open area zone, filled with various, what are they called, critical engagements, which are these one-off boss fights you queue for that can pop up after fulfilling certain criteria in the world of Bozja, or by doing various skirmishes, which are basically fancy words for fate. And at the culmination of each of these zones, we had a little dungeon that could go along with it, culminating in an actual finale dungeon. It was a really interesting piece of content, but it was polarizing, due to people just burning out on critical engagements and skirmishes and the way those pieces of content spawn or are generated. Personally, I really enjoyed Bozja. It was a fun little grind zone to go in whenever, to have some kind of progress that had a bunch of fun rewards associated with them in terms of gear, various appearances, and the RNG loot box drops that you also acquire. However, we don't have a piece of content similar to that in Endwalker, at least yet, and I don't believe one is on the cards. Instead, they went back to the deep dungeon design philosophy of Palace of the Dead and Heaven on High, and created Eureka Orthos, due to the influx of players that recently came into the game a couple of years ago, who experienced the deep dungeons from the expansions of old, and really enjoyed that piece of content, and it was highly requested, so they went back and designed Eureka Orthos, the new installment. And I've played through the first 30 floors of Eureka Orthos. I've done the, essentially, tutorial, the opening round of them, where you can match up with random people in a party finder and go in and clear them. It's very simple, straightforward, and kind of easy. However, I still found it enjoyable, and there was something about Eureka Orthos, particularly, that I enjoyed more than Heaven on High and more than Palace of the Dead, because I was never really big on Deep Dungeon. I was never big on the whole roguelike mechanic system surrounding it to begin with. Just not the kind of player that I am. However, there was something about Eureka Orthos that I just found fun. Maybe it was just having not done a deep dungeon in so long, it had this breath of fresh air for me. But I think there's also a few design iterations that they went into with Eureka Orthos that I found quite particularly fun. The floors themselves were very straightforward and simple, with just trying to dodge rudimentary traps that might explode on you, trying to avoid mechanics that may silence you or prevent you from actually casting abilities. But the large chunk of it was going in, fighting chests, acquiring powers, various consumable items to be used in that run, and clearing the floors like a roguelike to culminate in the 10th floor boss fight. Beat it, your job done. Easy. However, some of the powers I found to be really interesting. And also there were random events that could happen in these floors that may give you a benefit, like increasing your HP and MP by a decent significant amount. Or they could really increase the power of the minions or the mobs that you're fighting in that floor. You may run across a special mob that is extremely powerful, and you may not be able to defeat under normal circumstances. However, using those consumables that you've been acquiring up to this point, you can find some way around that. For instance, there's one of them that reduces boss HP, or HP of minions around you, to single digits, which means you can really clap them up and acquire those rewards, because those giant, big, threatening monsters drop a chest that you can use to gain even more power from. So there's an incentive there to find some way to beat them. And there's also this one consumable that someone used in my last run, going from floor 20 to 30, that was sweet as hell. Essentially, the floor had this gloom effect, which made all the monsters there significantly more powerful. They took less damage, dealt more damage, etc. So under normal circumstances, that would have been a very difficult floor to clear, and we didn't have anything to remove that status effect like we could on the previous floor. So what did someone in my party do? They used one of the consumables to turn into a giant freaking mech unit and just annihilate the floor. It was wacky, but it was visually appealing and it was cool as hell. The fact we had these kinds of tools at our ability or capability that we can utilize whenever or wherever we wanted to. And you can also acquire these clones of previous soldiers of Alag that you can summon for a floor and essentially have them be a fifth party member that's an NPC. It's a really cool system how they get able to weave back and forth between providing these powerful enchantments or these powerful bonuses to you, while also sometimes dialing up the difficulty. Now, it is floor 1 to 30, they're not supposed to be very difficult, and I want to explore later floors and see how that develops and how that is just overall executed, because that's meant to be for the tryhards who want a bit more challenge in the gameplay. So I'm excited to try that content out. But here's my question, and why I labeled the video as, did they mess up? Or something along those lines. Does it have the staying power as Bozja? And does it even need to? Because honestly, I feel like this question is going to boil down to your own personal preferences as an individual and what type of content most resonates with you. They're gonna have the data on the back end to know if going with this type of content was the way to go for Endwalker. I think either way we'll see a return to the Bozja formula with 7.x. I think we're going to see that for a particular reason. I don't think they want people to burn out on that Bozja type of content. And going 2 expansions in a row could breed this feeling of, okay, we've kind of already just done this before, but if you have an expansion gap in the middle between that, where you focus on a different type of content, it could be refreshing when we eventually get back to that type of content like Bozja. Because a deep dungeon and those open world Eureka / Bozja type of contents appeal to different players, at least I feel. Bozja really reminds you that this is an MMO game, where there's a lot of players in these zones that have to work together to tackle these very hard challenges to come together, and they culminate in various raid fights and dungeons that the group has to progress through and act as an organized whole. Whereas the Deep Dungeon is a very smaller scale experience, where you're just going in with 3 other people to clear these dungeons. However, you could also potentially at least solo them, like you could with Palace of the Dead, to get the Necromancer title. So that's a personal, solo-based challenge that you can choose to do if you want to do it. That's not really available in Bozja. You can go into it solo, but you would have to team up with everybody around you if you want to tackle those critical engagements, etc. Unless you get stupid levels of power, because you could really exponentially level up your ability to just pump out numbers in Bozja because of the enchantments they gave you there. And personally, I don't think it was a mistake to go with Eureka Orthos. I don't think going with another deep dungeon is a mistake. It gives them the chance to try out alternate forms of content and iterate on it and see what works and what sticks. I think at the end of the day, Bozja and these deep dungeons showcase 2 different ends of the spectrum to what Final Fantasy XIV can offer in a multiplayer experience. One is the smaller scale dungeon experience, the other is the larger scale raid experience. And I feel like they both do a good job at that, but they also appeal to different people. So you're gonna have eventually one group that's saying, we want the deep dungeons, these are really fun pieces of content that appeals to the smaller scale engagements that a lot of people do enjoy, while you have the other group that's like, hey, this is an MMO, I want to play with a lot of people and have these very epic, grand scale engagements. Sure, Bozja wasn't perfect, but it was a massive step in the right direction a lot of the way, and a lot of the time. It can be iterated on and made even better, and I think it's true for both pieces of content. There's something to be said about the roguelike experience that comes with a deep dungeon, especially with Eureka Orthos, and just how they've iterated on the whole power structure system in there. And the idea that each run can feel fundamentally different just based upon what powers you manage to find in there. And you don't feel like finishing one run invalidates all the progress you just made, because you're able to carry over your arms and armor levels into the next run. Or if you choose to, you can choose to lower those levels again in exchange for a token that you can use to get a new weapon or something. So there is some kind of cross progression in this system. I think that's a really interesting idea to reward the player here. At this moment, I do think I prefer the overall progression system that came from the Bozja content. I liked having those multiple suits of gear that you could acquire at various ranks. There's a whole swath of items you could find in there. And personally, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I liked the progression system that was there with Bozja. And if I had to pick one piece of content, personally, I'd probably prefer that Bozja design overall. It's just what I find more appealing, but I do find the deep dungeons appealing in their own right. And there is something to be said, in my opinion. I don't think this was their primary motivation for doing this. However, there is something to be said for leveling alt classes, or alt jobs, where you go from, if you don't want to just dungeon grind right, you could go from roulette spam, Palace of the Dead, get the Stormblood, then do Heaven on High, get the Shadowbringers, then do Bozja, and then you can do another deep dungeon at level 81 up. There's something to be said about that. So it can just keep the whole leveling old job experience fresh. And you're not just doing one singular piece of content over and over again across multiple expansions. It diversifies the type of content that you can interact with while leveling up your old jobs. And I think there's something to be said about that, because personally, I'm not that big on just grinding the same dungeons over and over again. I like having some kind of variety. Even if it's a little bit slower, sometimes I like just having that variety that I can choose to go into and progress that type of content if I want to. Especially since with Bozja and with Eureka Orthos, there is a level of cross-progression there, so I could level up an old job through floors 1 to 30, trading in my armor and weapon levels, so that when my new job is maxed, I have a new weapon for it. That's level 620. That's a cool idea. There's a nice little bit of synergy there. You can have one file for your try-hard endgame runs of Eureka Orthos, and then another save file for all your alternate jobs. That's a really cool little bit of synergy they have with this system here. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to really fall down to upon what you personally want out of Final Fantasy XIV Endgame. I don't mind trying something new with the whole Eureka Orthos. It's probably, at least from my experience, the deep dungeon I've enjoyed the most so far, and I haven't even done floors 31 plus. There's a lot of cool ideas here, and small iterations on the deep dungeon formula that I do appreciate. So I'm going to call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on Eureka Orthos and Bozja as pieces of content. Which did you prefer? What do you want to see in the future? If you could make one change to Eureka Orthos, what would it be? I want to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions. Because you probably have a different opinion to me, and that's entirely fine, but I want to hear what you think. And if you like this video, please hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload in the future. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.